It is 7 o'clock. Call this regular school board meeting to order. Thank you all for being here a little later than normal. A little hiccup, but we're here. So do we have anybody to lead us in the pledge? No, right? Would you lead us in the pledge, sir? Thank you. Please rise. Please remain standing for a moment of silence. You may be seated. Mr. Castillo, could you please take roll?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Sandra Garcia.
Present.
Mr. Ruben Trevino.
Present.
I am here. Martin Castillo. Ms. Leticia Quintero is not here. Mr. Ray Farias is not here. Mr. Jesus Amaya.
Present.
Mr. Leonel Garza.
Present.
Dr. Gonzalo Salazar.
Present.
Ms. Priscilla de la Garza, Counsel.
Present.
Thank you. We do not have anybody signed up for public audience or public comment, so we'll move on to item number 7, district reports. Dr. Salazar, I'll turn it over to you.
Mrs. Garcia, members of the board, we present this month's financial reports, items A through E at this time. Does anyone have any questions regarding any of those items? If there are no questions regarding our financial reports, we would like to give you a brief overview of summary of proposed budget for the year ending 2022. Mr. Basaldua.
Thank you, Superintendent. Ms. Garcia, members of the board, again, what I'm going to present to you is just a summary of the proposed budget for fiscal year 2022. The cover page begins on page 38 of board book, and that kind of provides a brief overview of, in essence, of the budget that you have before you. Moving forward, this still reflects House Bill 3 and all the changes that it made, and it also takes into account, the proposed pay increase for the coming year. On page 39, really, the first few pages of the proposed book include all governmental funds. So in essence, that would include the general fund, transportation fund, child nutrition fund, and the debt service fund, which encompasses all the adopted budgets. So instead of going over all of them, in essence, I'm going to begin and go over them individually, which begins on page 42 of board book, which would be the general fund. In page 42 of board book, what it does is the very first column ends up being the amended budget for the current fiscal year that we're in. The amended budget includes 9 budget amendments that have been proposed to you. And then the second column is the proposed budget for fiscal year 22. Of course, the increase or decrease is the third column with the percentage between the two budget years. Within the revenues, there is an increase. So from the amended budget to the proposed budget, we do see an increase within line item 5710, which is local maintenance tax. So based on the state aid template and what we ended up doing is in regards to the appraised values. So this budget does reflect a decrease in our tax rate of 2 cents. But that decrease, and that is due to House Bill 3 and the compression, but that decrease is also encompassing or taking into consideration the appraised values. The appraised values that we've been utilizing, in essence, ends up being a significant increase, in essence, from last year to this year to 6.2, which are some of the same values that we've been presenting to you in regards to the plan of finance and the bond and everything that's kind of come through. But those certified values, we do not see final certified values until the end of July. So all we're doing is we're doing it based on projections and values that ends up changing. But again, and that's why it's so important to us to continue to kind of go back and ensure and review the state aid template and the different, areas in which how it may impact, the revenues, because as of now, even though we did have a reduction in our tax rate, the proposed tax rate, we still see an increase, because the certified values are, significantly higher than last year. So again, Based on that, there will be an increase in our collections. So in essence, the burden falls on the district to collect, additional tax revenue, and that's why you do see an increase of 2.1 million from last year to this year. And on top of that, the state aid that is being based on the proposed enrollment numbers for next year on our ADA, continues to be conservative, because again, that was also based on the enrollment update that we provided to you. So again, that state aid is still there, so as the state has said time and again, we are making you whole. So based on the line item under, revenues from state aid, they still continue to say yes, state aid per capita will be decreased, which again, last year there was an increase in comparison to this year, but the foundation money and the different state mandate programs, career and technology, special ed, bilingual, state comp, and the various ones that are listed and the revenues from state sources, you do see an increase from last year to this year. And what that means is based on the different populations that we serve, each of those different areas, they do anticipate for there to be an additional increase. Some of those state mandated programs do require a spending requirement of 55%, and then the difference of 45 ends up being, as far as foundation money under general fund. All of that to say, the proposed budget before you, ends up being total revenues of 109. A year ago, when we presented this budget to you, it was at 107. So there is an increase of the $2 million overall. And so really that increase ends up being the increase because of the increase in our proposed appraisals, and also because of the TRS. So because the TRS on behalf payments ends up having an increase within our revenues and within our expenditures. They're one and the same. And so the last few years we've had to bring budget amendments to you. And even in this budget amendment that we have before you, budget amendment number 10, we are having to increase the TRS on behalf as well. So we're taking into account that increase of 600,000, which again encompasses overall the 109. And moving on to the next page, what we end up seeing on the next page is we end up seeing again the total revenues that we just discussed, and then the expenditures. And so that's where the various expenditures that you see, again, the revenues on the top end up being our local, our state, and our federal, total revenues of 109,170, and then under the expenditures by function. Again, this expenditures by function, the middle column at the very bottom, towards the middle of the page of 107,396. This takes into consideration the proposed tax increase, and it also takes into consideration all the different needs, by the campuses and by the departments. So all of that to say that this is not a balanced budget as of now. I was not comfortable coming to you to say, we have 109 in our general fund revenues proposed, and here's 109 in our expenditures as well. Because at the end of the day, should the values change and there be a reduction, and so all of a sudden we don't have that $2 million increase in our proposed local tax, then where is it that I'm going to be able to find a means in which we say, we can't fund this now. So instead, this is what it is right now. We're going to continue to revise and amend as needed, and then be able to provide you updated information as soon as it becomes available. But keep in mind, everything that you have before you does include, the different budget needs from the departments of campuses. It does include the proposed tax increase, and as of now, it also includes the reduction of our tax rate from $1.18 to $1.16. Now, is there a possibility that compression could give us another penny or two? Yes. But we're not going to know that until the end of July once we have the final certified values, so we can plug that into our template and then see what the final compression and what that final say would be. One caveat to all of this, again, this is the amended budget, the very first column, so it does include the different amendments that we've brought before you for the year. So there is a significant variance between total expenditures of 124 versus the 107. And again, that being because we have had amendments to the budget that we did not budget for last year, as well as any type of rollover PO, the new projects that we funded, such as the West Chiller and the Lopez Riggins roofing and the high school roofing. All of those were projects that we've kind of done an amendment from fund balance. So it does include additional revenue that we've brought over from last year, from fund balance. So that's why there is an increase, a significant variance for expenditures of the 124 versus the 107. On page 44, it just kind of breaks down the different revenues and expenditures by object code. And then the only other ones that I'll go over, the child nutrition on page 45 of board book. There is again, in the child nutrition fund, what we end up seeing total revenues of 7.4 in comparison to last year of 7 million. They do anticipate, with all kids coming back to school, for us to have an increase. We are still budgeting conservatively, but we are taking into account additional meals that we're going to be able to claim. And then with that, total expenditures of 7.6, and we do see a deficit in our revenues to expenditures as of now of 176,000. The child nutrition fund does have a fund balance to be able to sustain and absorb that, but as of now, we will continue to monitor and revise as needed. And really, the main difference in regards to the deficit within the child nutrition fund, we did make some changes to various pay grades where we did shift some of those line items, and we also took into account, again, the proposed pay increase. The transportation fund on page 46 of board book, again, total revenues of 2.1 versus 2 million last year. We also do anticipate to be able to claim additional miles in current years in comparison to prior year. And as far as total expenditures, we do see 5.6 million in comparison to 5 million. And what we're doing now is we're playing a bit of catch up. I know last year the transportation fund was one of those funds where we did not have any type of capital outlay. We did not replace any of any of our fleet, and we also made sure that we didn't anticipate to have a significant number of bus drivers, so we did not, again, allow for as much overtime that we normally budget for. So that's one of the things we're playing a bit of catch up. We are still in the process of reviewing, some of those needs to see if that's really what is needed for the current year. And then finally, the debt service fund. The debt service fund on page 47 of board book, what we end up seeing there, this debt service fund budget does include the $63 million bond. So again, we did have a drop off, in the middle of the page of 3.8. Last year we had the cash defeasance where we had an additional debt service principal of 3 million, and we only ended up paying 1.7 with the outstanding bonds that we had. This year we had a very active, year in regards to our debt service. We were able to refund and reduce and make that additional debt service payment. So on top of that, then we ended up including, the very first payment of $1 million for the future bond payments. So that is the main reason for that 3.8. It is comparable to last year, but that's because we had that cash defeasance where we ended up budgeting that additional debt. And then on page 48, it really ends up showing the principal and the interest payments that we're making, regarding now, since we ended up refunding our 2015 outstanding bonds, and we refunded them this year, now both of them are considered or labeled as Series 2021. So we're going to have a Series 2021 refunding bond, and then the Series 2021 unlimited building tax bonds that were just passed for 63 million. And then again on page 49 through page 52, ends up providing you the various details so that you can see by location, by campus, by department, the various needs. And again, this is really what we utilize to make sure that we balance out, we account for everybody's needs and any type of requests that come in. Are there any specific questions I can address?
Any questions from the board? Mr. Trevino?
So just end of July is when we'll get better numbers.
And the numbers are being revised, as needed. By the end of July, I'll have a better idea once the final appraisals come out, and then we'll be able to revise and provide an update and hopefully be able to have a committee meeting to bring you additional information.
I'm going to attempt to give a summary of what you explained. If I leave anything out that is of significance, will you please let me know? So we are working our way towards a balanced budget. This is a work in progress, but what we see here today is a comparison of the amended budget versus the proposed budget. Reflects a variance that we can attribute to amendments to the budget. If you compare last year's amended budget to what we are working towards right now, there's a significant difference. Many of the amendments were in response to pandemic-related expenditures. We had to pivot, and we purchased lots of computers. In fact, we went to a one-to-one. We became a one-to-one district in a very short period of time. There were capital improvement projects that we began also. A very large one is the replacement of a chiller at West Chiller. But all of the capital improvement projects that are reflected in the amendment budget were approved by the board. Revenue received from wind farms was also significant, so you see a big variance in the amended budget versus the proposed. And then there were some lower expenditures too that made a difference. On the expenditure side, we didn't do as many tutorials as we expected. There wasn't a lot of professional development. There wasn't a lot of travel associated with professional learning opportunities for teachers. And then you also see higher property values and tax compressions. We talked about tax compression kicking in, and we're looking at today. We can tell you that we're looking at a 2-cent tax decrease, possibly 3 cents by the time we get to recommending a budget. So we do find ourselves in a good place. The numbers look different than they usually look this time of the year, but we're working our way towards a really good place. The numbers also, I did leave out a pay increase of 5% is reflected on the expenditure side under personnel costs here, but that pretty much summarizes, unless I left something out, probably. Okay, are there any questions from anybody or comments?
I know we went over the budget calendar, 6/14 meeting. I can't access it though. So are we going to have another budget committee meeting or this month, or are we going to wait till August, or I can't remember.
The recommendation on my end would for us to have, as soon as the appraised values come out at the end of July, for us to have one soon thereafter. That way I can give you updated information. We have a better idea for our tax rate would be, and then that way we can determine, any possible changes that y'all may have.
So on our calendar, we usually have a budget committee meeting the night we propose a tax rate and the adoption of a budget. We could cover some things in detail with you, right? The same night, and then come back with another budget committee if necessary. We do have capital improvement projects, so we would also like to make it a combination budget and facilities committee. I talked to Coach, and we're working on compiling information on some items. We did, remember, if you'll recall, we sold our bonds, got a really good interest rate there. Cost of construction is up, so I'd like to discuss that in more detail and how that might impact our budget. Hopefully by the time we talk to you, the price of a 2x4 and a sheet of plywood is not $78 anymore. $78 for a sheet of plywood is unheard of. But we hear the market is correcting itself as people go back to work, as mills start up again. So would like to bring you some information that's been shared with, by our architect and why we haven't rushed out to break ground on a middle school. So if you'll allow us that, we'll bring it to you first week of August.
So the first week in August?
Yes. The second week in August is when we would have our monthly meeting. Sound fair? Mr. Meyer?
Are there any other questions? We're good. Thank you for all the detail. If there's no other questions on reports, Mr. Garza?
I'd just like to clarify that if we need a facilities meeting whenever you and your cabinet are ready to present the material to the board, do it at that time. I know that you realize that I am somewhat out of pocket on things, but it's still needs to be done whether I'm there or not. So whenever you and your cabinet is ready to present to the rest of the board on the facilities as far as what we need to do, we need to get it done as soon as possible, please.
In all fairness, I'm gonna be out of pocket.
Oh.
So it buys us time, and it's all just gonna work out. It'll all come together here by the first week in August.
Thank you. Do we have any other board meetings this month? This is gonna be the only one? That feels weird. Okay. So then we'll move on to item number 8, if everybody's good and doesn't have any questions. Consent agenda, we have 10 items on consent agenda. If there's any one specific item that a board member wants to pull, please let me know now. Otherwise, I'll take a motion on consent agenda. Mr. Amaya?
Madam
Oh,
Chair,
I'm sorry. Did you not?
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Did. Madam Chair, I move that we approve consent agenda as posted, items 1 through 10.
Thank you, sir. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Castillo. All in favor to approve consent agenda, please raise your hand. Passes unanimously. We move on to action items. Number 9, discuss and take action to approve out-of-state student travel for the 2021-2022 school year. We have CTE, DECA for Atlanta, Georgia, April 23rd through 26th of 2022. And then we have the CTE HOSA in Nashville, Tennessee, June 22nd through the 25th in 2022. Do I have a motion? Mr. Trevino?
Yes, Madam Chair, I move that the board approve out-of-state student travel for the 2021-2022 school year. A, CTE Distributive Education Clubs of America in Atlanta, Georgia, April 23rd through the 26th, 2022. And B, CTE Health Occupation Students of America, HOSA in Nashville, Tennessee, June 22nd through the 25th, 2022.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Mr. Garza, thank you, sir. Is there any discussion? Does anybody have any questions? There being no discussion, all those in favor, please raise your hand. The motion passes unanimously. We're passing it early so that we don't have to worry about it and the sponsors don't have to worry about it next year. So item number 2, discuss and take action to endorse Mr. Jesus Amaya to fill a position on the TASB Board of Directors for Region 1, Position A. Do I have a motion? Mr. Trevino?
Yes, Madam Chair, I move that the board endorse Mr. Jesus Amaya to fill a position on TASB Board of Directors for Region 1, Position A.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Mr. Castillo? A second. Is there any discussion? Any comments on how amazing it is that Mr. Amaya not only takes a leadership role here locally, but also at a regional level? Oh. Did I steal your thunder, sir? Sorry.
Oh, that's it.
Mr. Garza, did you want to say something?
Go away.
No, but thank you, sir. It's going to take time, and we appreciate you always representing us well. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. The motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4. Mr. Amaya abstains. Item number 3, discuss and take action to approve the superintendent's personnel recommendations for the following positions for the 2021-2022 school year. We have teachers, registered nurse, a Gear Up facilitator, assistant principals, and a principal for Dora Romero Elementary. Let me double check and make sure I have them. Do I have a motion? Mr. Castillo?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve superintendent's personnel recommendations for the following positions for the 2021-2022 school year. A, teachers. B, registered nurse. C, Gear Up facilitator. D, assistant principal. E, principal for Dora Romero Elementary.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Mr. Amaya will second. I know we have one new hire here, so I want to thank you for being here, and your kids have been very, very good, well behaved. So do I have, a second? All those in favor, please raise your hand. The motion passes unanimously. So welcome aboard to your new position, and thank you for your family for being here. We appreciate her support. Ms. Lucio?
This is Karina Lucio. She has been serving as assistant principal at LFE, and she will be principal at Dora Romero Elementary. We do not have any items to discuss in closed session, so I'll turn it over for announcements. Dr. Salazar?
Mrs. Garcia, members of the board, the only announcement we have this evening is that we have on Monday, August 9th, we have a 6 p.m. regular school board meeting, and as discussed here today, the week leading up to that, we'll hold a budget and facilities committee meetings to bring you important information and get some feedback from you on a few last few items dealing with our budget. Those are all the announcements we have.
Thank you, and thank you all for being accommodating today and being flexible. It is 7:26. I adjourn this meeting.